Hi, Eric.
Serge.
So, you have given some serious thought to what happens to a society when it is experiencing the kind of stress that it is experiencing right now.
Yes. Uh, Under conditions of sustained stress, uh, there tends to be a chain reaction that moves through the group of people, whether it's a family, a community, or a whole society. And what happens in this kind of a chain reaction is that you end up where people who are anxious clump together with people who are anxious, and people who are apparently calmer, but usually actually dissociated, clump together with each other. So you end up with the people who uh, focus and perseverate and are anxious about the threat and agree with each other about this the whole time. And then other people who appear to be in denial and minimize the threat. And these form into two separate camps. And between the two camps, they tend not to include each other. They tend not to trust each other. It's very difficult for them to come to a common understanding of what's real and wasn't, and what isn't real. It's difficult for them to participate, to solve problems and build a life together. So what I'd like to focus on is a little bit on how this mechanism works and what we can do to bring some flow between these two camps. They can be helpful from our families up to our society.
Yeah. So there's something about there's kind of an isomorphy between what happens at the level of society as a whole, at the level of smaller groups within the society, at the level of individual families. And that's that same mechanism of what happens under stress, that some people go into fight flight and some people go into collapse. And you have that polarization of reactions.
Yes, and it appears at different levels, not so much because it's a phenomenon at those different levels. It is, but because you can pick any set of three people and it grows the same way that a chain reaction grows. So let me give you an example. Let's say I'm very, very upset about something, and I come to you and I say, Serge, I'm so upset about this terrible thing, and I'm filled with anxiety. I'm upset. You must listen to me. And it puts you into a very particular dilemma. It's not really a dilemma, but it appears to be a dilemma. You can agree with me, and if you agree with me, you're going to be flooded by my anxiety, which is not pleasant. Or you can disagree with me and you spare yourself the anxiety. Now, those two responses affect me differently. If you agree with me and you feel my anxiety, now we've reinforced how I see the situation, and you're anxious and I'm anxious both. So fine. So now the two of us are going to go tell other people about how upsetting this thing is. If, on the other hand, you say, no, you're exaggerating, Eric, then I become even more anxious because now you're rejecting what I know to be true. So now my anxiety is increased and I go out to try to recruit someone else. Now, in an open system, meaning you and I are surrounded by tens or hundreds of people who are calm, this is not a problem. It just kind of bleeds out. And this happens all the time. But in a closed system, families are more closed system. And right now, the whole planet is affected by this virus and by economic strains. So right now, we're having a closed system phenomenon. And in the closed system, there's no way for you to go. If you say yes and you join me in the anxiety, we have a limited number of people that we can talk to before we run into other people who are already dealing with this dissociation or anxiety. And so it begins to bounce off each other, and it becomes again a chain reaction where you end up with the people who are very anxious and the people who are dissociated, and this is the split. And the split is harmful. It's harmful us at every level of relationship.
Yeah. So that's a very, very, very powerful expression of the dynamic, and that there's a dilemma that when confronted with the anxious person, no matter what you do, is not a good option. But there's something about opposing the anxious to the dissociated person. There's another opposition, anxious to calm. So are we talking about the fact that there are just anxious people and calm people, or anxious people and dissociated people?
That's a really good question. We have tendencies toward one or the other. Some of us are more phlegmatically, more tend to be just more slow and calm, and some of us are more traumatized and passive because of that. Some of us are more sort of wired and sympathetically activated. Yes, there are tendencies, but this dynamic overrides all of those tendencies. Just to give an example of this, so my brother is an emergency room doctor. Well, so he's normally in this very active position around threats, right? People come into the emergency room all the time, and he is active in solving things. But imagine that that he's in a car wreck, and he's trapped in the car, and he can't do anything, and then some very traumatized, slow-moving person walks past. Well, that person is going to call the police or pull him out of the car. In other words, circumstances and this dynamic will override our tendencies. And you're right, we will tend to go to the tendency that fits us best. May I add something?
Mm-hmm.
So some of you may be thinking that this reminds you some of Murray Bowen's mapping of what happens in family systems. And good, because that's one of the bases of this work. But Bowen is talking about habits and stances and dynamics that have formed a homeostasis in a family over many, many years, if not generations. This is like that dynamic, except this is happening at high speed, and again, right, spreading like a chain reaction. But it does tell us what we can do about this dilemma, because the Bowen people figured out exactly what we should do. I don't want to go there too quickly, but we can talk about what can be done to avoid this dilemma when you're ready.
Yeah. But so just that very strong sense of this is not normal, and so everything takes place within the crucible of a crisis. And so the normal tendencies that we might have to, for instance, be calmer under pressure is going to be affected by the fact that there is intense pressure here that's way beyond what we're accustomed to. And so that's why we're talking about stress. This is a very extreme situation of stress.
Yes, that's right. And of course, we have two stresses going on. We have the stress of the virus, and then we have the second stress, which is arguably larger, which is the stress to the economy. But they're both stresses. We have solutions to both. Now, individuals may be traumatized. People may get sick. People may die. Businesses may shut down. But the societies are stressed. This is not a traumatic overwhelm for society. This is a sustained stress that's putting societies into these crucibles.
Right. So very clearly, we're separating the paying attention to individuals and paying attention to society, and our focus here is on society as a whole.
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe it makes sense to say, what does the experience of the Murray Bowen people tell us about how to handle this kind of stress?
Okay. To really simplify this even more, this chain reaction, you could think of it like electricity. And that when the electricity comes in, a person can accept it and it runs through them, and that feels terrible. This is the anxious creating rapport with the anxious. Or they can sort of flip flip the circuit breaker and nothing goes through. And there's the dissociation or cutoff response.
Yeah, so the all or nothing
And
response.
the all or nothing response. So as the Bowen people talked about, the way that we can serve ourselves, our families, our communities is by refusing either of those responses. And the way that happens is this. We stay in rapport with the other person while disagreeing with them. Somewhat. So if you're anxious, my response is going to be, if you come to me and you say, this is so terrible, Eric, my response is going to be is to take it seriously enough, and depending on how much past and how much trust we have, to maintain a rapport so the connection is alive between us, and I feel enough of the anxiety and acknowledge enough of your perspective that you will stay in relationship with me. The energy will flow, the anxiety will flow, but I will disagree with the extent of it.
Yeah.
So you come to me and you want a sandwich, I will give you half a sandwich, and you will be dissatisfied. So when we have the interaction, I didn't cut you off, but I didn't fully agree with you. So I'm basically suggesting that we have unsatisfying interactions with each other all the time, right? And so you say, well, I can basically trust Eric. It's okay, but he doesn't really get it. And so now what's happening is I'm acting as a rheostat, right? With like a light switch dimmer. So I'm accepting some of the anxiety, but I'm dampening some of your anxiety.
That's beautiful.
You don't get to escalate because, are you with me?
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
I could belabor this metaphor.
No, I love the metaphor. I absolutely love the metaphor. And I want to just take a breather to get people a chance to digest it. And I'm going to recap a little bit some of what I'm hearing. And first, so we're here in the level of the metaphor, and the metaphor involves two individuals as opposed to society. We'll come back to society. So just to clarify, we're in the part of it that's a metaphor. What I love about the metaphor is at many levels. You have various ways of expressing it, and I love the metaphor of the dimmer, and I love the metaphor of the half sandwich. And what I want to highlight is that in doing this, it's not just a mechanical cutting of the sandwich, but there is a profound thing that's happening is as the person who is listening to the anxious person coming, you're not just passive, you're not confronted with either or of just all or nothing, but you have a moment to really experience, yourself as a dimmer, to say, I have the choice of being somewhere in that continuum between all and nothing.
Yes.
And you have a chance to say, I respect the other person and I want to be in connection with them, but I respect myself and I want to be in connection with me. And the part of cutting the sandwich in two is about having some respect for one and some respect for myself.
Yes.
And the metaphor of the dimmer I love, because thinking of myself as a dimmer means I have agency. The outside circumstances are what they are, but I can take action in order to achieve that respect for the other and for myself. So that's a profound paradigm change, where instead of being simply passive in front of the crisis, I have the opportunity to ask, what can I do?
Yes. And if we interact and you say, can you believe, you're on the dissociation side, and you say to me, can you believe all these news reports? This is just a plot to hurt the economy so that whatever. My job there is to be in rapport with you in your dissociation and to feed anxiety to you. As much anxiety as you can tolerate without cutting off from me. So I can say, yes, I hear you, and my aunt is in the hospital with this right now. Oh, well that's tough, because you care about me as a person, and so you care about my family, and you care about my aunt, and if she really is in the hospital, now you're feeling some anxiety. So it's the other half of the sandwich. So again, if you're presenting no anxiety, then I want to bring you half an anxiety sandwich. And if you present anxiety, I want to bring you half a calm sandwich.
Yeah, yeah.
It's always a half a sandwich.
And so very, very much in the whole concept of polarized roles, that if somebody is ostensibly in one pole, just occupying the other pole is going to increase polarization. And so we see that the person is in one pole, and we find in ourselves the part that is experiencing some of that anxiety, not necessarily for the same reason. Not, it might be, in fact, we have a different content to it, but we pay attention to our own anxiety and bringing it in there. And so that emotionally, there's not one person who is on the anxious pole and one person who's on the calm or apparently calm pole.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm taking a breath here because I could just keep talking for.
No, but actually, I appreciate the breath there, because it's as we follow this, there is a logic to it, and it seems relatively simple. But I think the breath is really warranted in the sense of the magnitude of the work, the emotional work that is involved in order to be able to do this, because these situations are situations of intense pressure, and we tend to actually break down under the pressure of the other person's anxiety and our own in how to manage it. So I think it's kind of that breath is about honoring the difficulty of doing this.
Very much. If it works, I'd like to leap from the handful of people or the family and friends up to the societal level for a moment.
Great.
So a thing, but I am going to use an expression from Murray Bowen again, which is he would talk about there are no angels and devils. So he would say it doesn't make sense when we want the light switch to be all or nothing, to be off or on, because that's not actually how reality is. But it can seem like reality when we're polarized. So we have had progressively more polarizing presidents over the last few presidents. Each one has become more polarizing. And to say, yes, the source of all problems, the source of all evil in the world is Donald Trump is ridiculous. That it's not accurate. One can criticize his personality, his moral code, his effectiveness, his policies, everything. But that does not make him a devil. And one can go to the other side. If somebody just loves everything that Trump does, neither is he an angel. Neither was Obama. And the point of this is not to create an equivalence. There is right, there is wrong. Some people are much better at something. Some people are a little bit better. Some people are more moral than others. This is not an equivalence. It's simply to say that the two extremes of angel and devil, it's a simplicity for the mind, but it does not help relationship. It stops the flow, and it's not helpful. It degrades. It excludes everyone who's in the other position. It degrades trust between the two positions. It makes it almost impossible to have common understanding, and it makes it almost impossible to participate with people from another point of view to find solutions.
Yeah. So it seems like you started from the concept of Murray Bowen's concept of no angel, no devil.
Yes.
And the thing that makes it very difficult for people to follow this in practice is the idea that if the person who on the whole I favor and the person who on the whole I really have tremendous problems with are neither angels nor demons, then does it mean they're the same because they're somewhere in the middle? And actually, it's not at all what you're saying. It's simply, for argument's sake, you might say there's a continuum that's this big, and one's going to be more on one side, the other is going to be more on the other side. It's not a question of saying you have to agree that they're the same, which, you're not saying, but there is a lot of space between the two poles, and that the discussion is better served if we're saying that we're somewhere on this continuum as opposed to on one of the poles.
Yes, I think politically the clearest example we had of this was in 2008 when the John McCain and Barack Obama were competing for the presidency, and things were becoming more and more extreme in the rhetoric each way. And there was concern around some of the violence that it was feared would arise. In particular, some of the aggressiveness of Sarah Palin's characterizations of Obama. And John McCain stepped forward and said, Barack Obama is not an evil man, right? He said, no angels and devils is what McCain said.
Yeah.
That, he's a family man, he's a good man. And I happen to disagree profoundly with his policies and his vision for the country. So that was an example of him saying no angels and devils.
Yeah.
But there is a huge difference, a gulf between us.
Yeah, yeah. And I was very moved, and I still remember that situation and feel very moved when I remember it. And one of the things that is very moving about it is it takes a strength to say, he is not an evil man, and I disagree, because it puts the emphasis on I agree or disagree as a human being, as opposed to this is good and evil. I have no responsibility for it. I just happen to have identified what is good. So, that's something where, beyond the good and evil is actually not taking responsibility, and including taking responsibility for the fact that we may not be right, and it's a subjective opinion.
Yes. Yes. So this goes back to what you were saying before about how we have agency in this time to interact with other people and to move away from the angel and devil position.
Yeah.
To neither fully agree with the anxious, neither fully agree with the dissociated, to neither fully agree with the calm, and to connect with the person, keep rapport with that person as a human being, politically, personally, our spouse, a member of our community, a member of another political party, to keep that emotional rapport and respect while pushing against another position.
Yeah, yeah.
This would help dampen the extremes and help bring us together to be able to create the conditions to be able to come to the so many agreements that we need to. We have so many challenges right now, from taking care of families to how much social distancing to how to help small businesses that are falling apart. There are problems with this on all sides, and we need everyone, or at least we need a lot more than half of us to be able to solve these problems.
Yeah. And so I really, as you restated, I find it very simple and eloquent to separate the person and the position. Mm-hmm. The difficulty in my mind is that we tend to identify with position because, in a way, don't feel as solid by saying, I believe this, and it's easier to believe it if we believe it's an absolute truth. So in order to do this, there is a growing up about accepting that, say, my belief is potentially questionable. It's not an absolute truth, that I can be attacked for it, and that, I'm not safe by simply stonewalling others by saying it is correct because it's the truth and the rest is, false.
Yes.
So how do we deal with that inherent vulnerability? I think that my sense of it is that the vulnerability of saying it's just my opinion, I believe strongly in it, I disagree violently with the other position. But, after all, I'm realizing that it's only a point of view. It's not absolute truth. It's not absolute science, and I'm vulnerable about stating that. I think that's kind of what makes us harden into wanting it to be an absolute truth.
I agree. Arnie Mindell used to say, and probably still says today, that roles are bigger than people, but people are more complex than roles.
Yeah.
And so it's easy for us to be swept away by the power and simplicity of a role when we're much more than that.
Yeah. So in that sense, to apply it, we're much more than, say, a Democrat, a Republican, a progressive, a conservative, a Trump hater, a Trump lover. So how can we, in practice, find a way to grow into that larger sense of self?
And this comes back to the theme of our talk today, which is in a time of sustained stress, which we have with the virus and with the stress on the economy, is to track the stress or disconnection or dissociation or lack or apparent lack of stress, is to just track that one thing and ask ourselves, so when I interact with somebody else, if they're calmer than me around this current stress in our society, then I want to be in rapport, and I want to share more stress with that person. If the person is more stressed than I am, then I want to be in rapport, and I want to bring in some calmness.
Yeah.
And so simply doing that will just dampen and open a flow.
Okay. So I want to kind of beat it over the head again with a 2x4 with by slightly changing the wording. What you're talking about is remembering that the conversation is not just about the content, the words, about the ideas and about the concepts. We're in the realm of human communication, and human communication is partly about ideas, but is partly about how our various nervous systems, moods, emotions, states of nervous system interact with each other.
Yes.
And so communication in a time of crisis and stress is probably much more than half about the level of stress and how each person is responding to the stress than about the ideas themselves.
Yes.
So when we get seduced by simply focusing on the ideas, then we start arguing with them, but we're missing out on maybe what is the most important part of the interaction, which is that the stress is affecting all of us. And so we need to respond to the stress and to our two persons being affected by stress much more than simply arguing about ideas.
Yes. So Alan Shore sums this up very nicely when he talks about there's an unconscious conversation that's happening in groups all the time at the level of the nervous system. And if we address that first, there's more space for the ideas. But if we look at the ideas, then what's happening with the nervous system simply runs the show. So if we focus on the nervous system rapport first, we get both. If we focus only on the ideas, we are captured by the dynamics of the nervous system.
Yeah, literally hijacked. So that's a trauma reaction. We're trying to avoid dealing with the nervous system in order to deal with the ideas. In fact, we're only acting out on the nervous system. And
Exactly.
just like in therapy, as we are coming to a more mindful place, and then it's possible to address things, we're doing the same thing here at the level of society.
Yes.
So it feels like a great place to end. I want to just check if there's something that you might want to add.
This is good. This is a pleasure.
Thank you, Eric.
Serge, so good to see you.